Well, welcome to today's podcast of Christian Business Concepts. I'm really excited to have you be a part of the Christian Business Concepts family, and I hope that you'll be encouraged and enlightened and empowered today. I want to take this opportunity, too, to ask you, if you would, to write a review of the Christian Business Concepts podcast, and let us know if we're giving you a real good base for some help and utilizing Christian concepts in your business or in your workplace. Would love to hear from you, so feel free to reach out to us. Today's podcast is a part 2 of the power of becoming a problem solver. And today we're going to discuss a very specific multi-stage method to solving problems. Now, before we do that, I just kind of want to recap. We just kind of talked a little bit in last week's broadcast about why, leaders sometimes fail to solve problems. A list of those things that included a lack of commitment, a failure to discern what the problem is correctly, bad information, ineffective implementation. Once a actual problem where there was resolution as to what could happen, the wrong people are involved in the process of solving the problem. The social cost is too high, and fear of failure. So those were some of the reasons that people don't solve problems. We talked about thinking skills, and the most important thinking skills for problem solving is critical thinking and creative thinking. And we talked about the differences between critical thinking and creative thinking. And then we talked about some of the skills that a person needed to have to be a creative thinker and a critical thinker. What are some of the skills that we need to have? So today we're going to talk about how to solve problems using ideas, which is more of a cycle than anything else. And when I say we're going to solve problems with ideas, I mean IDEAS. The reason that I say it is a cycle is that some implemented solutions don't work. You came up with a great solution, but it just didn't work. The idea was well thought out. The implementation process was effective and successful. And when the solution fails to fix the problem, we start the whole process over again. And in some cases, this cycle is repeated multiple times until you find a solution that works. It's kind of like James Dyson. He was the guy that invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner, and he went through over 5,000 iterations before he got it right. But in some cases, each time the process is completed, the solution is a little bit more efficient, a little bit closer to near perfection. And even when companies have developed solutions that have successfully fixed a problem, they continue that cycle, knowing that they have the opportunity to make it even better. So here is a description. The following is a description of each of the 5 phases that I try to incorporate when I'm trying to solve a problem, and it is ideas. So the I stands for identify the problem. Identify the problem. This is the most important and critical stage, because if you don't correctly identify the problem, you're only going to labor to produce ineffective solutions. I mean, this is the stage where you gather as much information as possible from the right people. This is the stage where all of the questions are answered. Now, if the right questions are not asked, then you'll never discover the true problem. If you'll remember a man by the name of Gene Kranz, And he was the flight director and manager for NASA during the Gemini and Apollo space program, which is when I grew up as a kid. I grew up during the Gemini and Apollo space program, so I remember Gene Kranz. And he was best known for his role in directing mission control and in their efforts to save the astronauts that were aboard the crippled Apollo 13 spacecraft. There was a movie that came out about it called Apollo 13. And once that mission became critical and life-threatening, Gene was quoted as saying, "Let's work the problem, people. Let's not make things worse by guessing." And you will notice that guessing is not one of the stages in ideas. So you've got to identify the problem. And this stage requires you to be in command of the facts. You must have your facts. People with facts do not start with sentences like, "I think," or "maybe." No, they're dealing with facts. Facts are void of emotion. Facts are not interested in who gets blamed. You know, Proverbs 18 and 13 in the Living Bible says, "What a shame, yes, how stupid, to decide before knowing the facts." You know, looking back to our story we talked about with the toothpaste factory in this actually part one of this podcast, we can easily see that they did not have all of the facts. He did not know why the production line was producing empty boxes of toothpaste. So even though they came up with a simple solution, they still never answered the question, why was the production line actually producing empty boxes of toothpaste? He did not talk to anybody on the production line. He clearly did not command all of the facts. So when gathering the data, information, and facts, you need to make sure that you, number one, try to see the problem from multiple vantage points or perspectives. Number two, you need to list all of the attributes of the problem. You know, what are the symptoms? Number three, list what you have discovered as possible causes. Number four, make sure you look beyond what appears to be the obvious causes. And then number five, think outside the box with regards to the causes. So once the facts, the data, all that information is collected, now you got to begin to analyze it in order to discover as much detail as you possibly can. You know, the details that seem to be the most insignificant can sometimes be the one thing that leads you to the greatest solution, or at least to be a big piece of the solution. You know, Pat Riley is one of the greatest coaches in the NBA, and he coached the Los Angeles Lakers, the New York Knicks, and the Miami Heat. And he actually led the Lakers to win 4 NBA championships, and he led the Heat to another championship. And when asked how some of his teams with just, you know, some, I guess you'd say mediocre talent could win championships, he explains that his talent is in the attention to detail. He analyzes an opposing team's performance in areas others that maybe coaches might think unimportant, and he does the same with his own players. So he pays very close attention to details, which is what you need to do when you are getting this information, right? So keep digging, keep asking why until every detail, every fact, every bit of information has been squeezed from every source and every report. And once you have all this information, now you got to organize it. And there are several methods of doing this. But you can use something what's called like a problem tree. It's like a, you've seen a hierarchical type of chart where it shows the different people and who reports to who and so on and so forth. You can do the same thing with a problem tree, right? So you show the core problem in the center, and then you start branching out, and you put in things like, what's the immediate effect? What's the immediate cause? What's the secondary cause? And you just continue to build that tree. and the problem is placed in the center of the tree, and then the effects caused by the problem are listed above and around it. All of the direct causes that have been discovered through data and fact-finding processes, all of that are listed here too around the tree. So hopefully you'll drill deeper into the causes and find causes to causes, right? And then these are the secondary causes, right? So it's important to get all of this information collected. Now, after you've done that, let's go to the D in ideas, and that stands for discuss possible solutions. Now, in this stage, you want to begin to throw out every idea. When I mean every idea, I mean every idea. And others on your team can think of ideas as well and let them come up with lots of ideas. But it doesn't matter how far out it may sound. Write it down. The very first boss I ever worked for told me, he said, the best way to find the best and greatest ideas are to go through a bunch of really bad ideas. And sometimes even the bad ideas can wind up being very successful. Proverbs 18:15 in the Living Bible says the intelligent man is always open to new ideas. In fact, he looks for them. You take for an example the story of Gary Dahl. In 1975, while he was listening to some friends and customers at a bar complain about how their pets, and listening to them talk about their pets, he and all the problems and all the issues, he had this product idea, and it was such a bad idea that, when he was talking to all these people in the bar and he told him what they were going to do, and he said, dude, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Well, the product was called the Pet Rock. And within 18 months of his idea, Gary became a multi-millionaire. So some of the best ideas have come from one or more bad ideas. So sometimes bad ideas get your mind engaged. It gets ideas starting to kind of flow through your mind, right? So at this stage, you're not interested in evaluating each of the ideas. Don't even think about them. Just write them down. It's easy to stop the idea process when you say, "Oh, I found it. This is it," or "Oh, that's a horrible idea." No, don't analyze it at this point. You just want to write them down, right? So you just need to start brainstorming with this group of people. Now, I love to brainstorm, but let me tell you, you can do it the wrong way and you get nowhere. But try to include some of these techniques for brainstorming, okay? This is something that I've done over the years, and it really works. But, to be good at brainstorming, you got to ask questions that inspire ideas. In other words, you got to ask that, well, what if? Or maybe you say, well, why not? Always ask this question in your brainstorming ideas. If we could not fail, what would we do? Or if we had unlimited resources, what will we do? And you also then want to question the status quo. The thing that all leaders hate to hear is, well, that's the way we've always done it. So look beyond the obvious. Use different color markers to organize your ideas, or use those really, really big sticky pads that you can stick on the wall to organize your ideas. You can use a flip chart. You can use what's called mind mapping. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up. It's a great tool for coming up with ideas. Identify what you have to work with, including your tools, your budgets, and all that kind of stuff. Don't allow criticism of any kind. That'll stifle brainstorming right there. So don't criticize. Just let people come up with the ideas. People find it easier to criticize than to encourage. I mean, it's just a natural thing in people. So make it a point to not allow ideas to be put down. Create a relaxing environment. Ideas just flow easier when people are relaxed. And then, build off of ideas. Sometimes you springboard off of a bad idea into a really good idea. So, build off of these other ideas or combine ideas. That's even better. So take his idea and her idea and put them together, and maybe that's the best idea. Write down everything as they say them. Don't add to it. Don't Don't change it. But as they speak that idea, write it down exactly that way. And encourage imagination. Encourage people to dream about it, right? So, when you do a brainstorming session, make sure that you choose a facilitator. Now, this is going to be the person that's responsible for communicating, enforcing the rules that you establish. And then the next thing you do is make sure you communicate and implement your rules, right, on what they are. Maybe you say, well, nobody can talk unless you're holding this special stick or whatever it is. But just whatever your rules are for your session, just make sure you communicate those. And then make sure you maintain order, because nothing can be accomplished as everybody's talking at the same time, right? So make sure you maintain order. There are several ways this can be done, but, have everybody write down their ideas and turn them into the facilitator, or, and then he can read each one of them. Another way is to maybe only allow one person to speak at a time, obviously. But you can also do a roundtable style discussion where one person gives an idea and then it passes to the next person until each person has had a chance to speak. Maybe you put a time limit, everybody gets 2 minutes or what have you. So, make sure that you maintain order. Next, make sure that you focus on quantity, not quality. We're not looking for quality right here. We're looking for as many ideas as we can get. Ideas are like rabbits, I always like to say. You get a couple of them together and learn how to handle them, and pretty soon you got a dozen of them. So you want a lot of ideas. Again, set a time limit. Make sure to establish and communicate the time that's being devoted to the brainstorming session, right? According to De Bono 6-hat method, most people think in one of 6 thinking strategies. They're either an emotional thinker, and you could make that a red, color. A positive thinker, that's a yellow color. A critical thinker, that could be black. Creative thinker, make that a green marker. Facts thinker, make that a white one or another color. The big picture thinker, let them be that blue. But by understanding the different thinking strategies, you can begin to try and utilize all of them in your brainstorming session. Okay? Let's go on. So let's go to the E in ideas. Evaluate all of the ideas and options. So now that you have all these ideas, now you got to begin to evaluate them. Now, most everybody has heard of the Ben Franklin method of making choices and evaluating choices. It's where you divide the paper in half, and on one side you list the positives, and on the other side you list the negatives. And this stage works in a similar manner. What you're going to do is you're going to take these ideas, and you're going to divide the paper in half, if you will, if you want to actually do it that way. But there's also some other methods too. You could have a criteria method. So in other words, you develop maybe 5 or 6 criterias, and you use a point system to grade each idea on how good it meets that criteria. Another method could be a pass-fail method. That's just a simple variation of this criteria method. Instead of a point system, you just say, yeah, it passes, no, it fails, right? You can also do a SWOT analysis method. We've talked about doing SWOT analysis before. So you could do that. And SWOT just stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So each one of the ideas could have a SWOT assessment done. Well, regardless of the method you decide to use, the end result in this stage is to have a list of ideas that are graded. So you have these ideas that you put, maybe you number them 1 through 10 or 1 through 20, however many ideas that you have. Now, once you've organized and graded each of these ideas, then you move on to the 4th stage, which is the A, and that stands for adopt the best solution. Now, maybe it's not number 1, maybe it's number 3. But this is where you guys have to talk and discuss, and that's why a SWOT assessment can sometimes be a really good way to finalize which idea is the best solution. But you're going to implement this best solution, right? You're going to adopt it. You're going to implement it. So when choosing the best solution from the list of graded ones, Ask some of these questions. Okay, like what are the risks that are going to come along with this solution? What are the limitations? What are the difficulties that you're going to encounter when you start to implement it? How soon can we implement it? That's a big deal. Are there any additional benefits from this solution? Maybe another solution has a lot better benefits that go along with it. Are there any long-term benefits or disadvantages for a particular solution? Is it cost-effective? Will it be reliable? And is it efficient? So once you have the solution and it's been chosen, you got to implement it, and implementation always requires commitment, it requires planning, and it requires preparation. Those three things: commitment, planning, and preparation. Ask yourself this question: what's better, a poor plan with good implementation or a good plan with poor implementation? Well, the answer is neither. You need both. You need a good plan and good implementation to successfully solve a problem. Implementation is the actions and processes required to carry out your solution. So how many product launches and government programs have we seen fail because they had poor implementation? Kodak Camera launched a new product with this big national ad campaign that drove customers to the stores, only to have the whole thing fail because the cameras hadn't even arrived in the stores in time. So successful implementation requires commitment from everybody involved in the execution of all the procedures and actions. It takes support from the management team, from the leaders, and this is why it's important to have everybody's buy-in to the solution. For some leaders, implementation is the hardest part of problem solving. This is if I could say it this way, it's like the sink or swim moment. This is when they make the decision to not turn back. This is the moment that they begin to become fully committed, right or wrong. Mary Kay Ash of Mary Kay understood this. She was quoted as saying, "Ideas are a dime a dozen. People who implement them are priceless." You've got to follow the proper steps of implementation. And if you do that, I don't think you'll have this fear of failure as much. Your plan may fail, but it won't be a failure as long as you go through all of the necessary steps for successful problem solving and successful implementation. So what are some of those things? Well, you got to establish the needed processes and procedures. You need to develop a well-written document that outlines the solution and how it's to be implemented, because you got to be able to articulate it. And if you can't write it down, that means you can't articulate it. So then you got to train those people who are going to be involved in the process of implementation. You got to have the right tools. You got to have the right computers, maybe the resources and the budgets. You got to have all that in place. And then what you want to do is make sure you develop milestones. You got to develop. The next place that we reach is this, and that tells us we're moving in the right direction with our solution. So develop some milestones. Create a timeline. Where should you be in 6 months? Where should you be in 3 months? Where should you be in 12 months? Make sure that you have a timeline. And then make sure you try to anticipate some roadblocks as best you can. If you can anticipate them, then it's easier for you to be able to deal with them ahead of time. So lastly, ideas. The S in ideas is study the results. So good problem solvers understand that the first solution may not work out, and the whole process, you got to start again. Some people are willing to shortchange the what we would call the monitoring of the results, But you don't want to do that because this is critical for the ongoing success. You've got to analyze it. You got to evaluate that implementation process. You got to, it'll help you recognize if you got to make like maybe a mid-course change, or maybe you got to make some additions. It also helps you determine early if the solution is going to be effective or not. Maybe it's not going to work, but if you don't study the results, you'll wind up wasting a lot of time before you get to that same result that you could have went and gotten in the very beginning stages if you just looked at the results and studied the results. You may determine by making some minor adjustments that you could, develop a much better solution than the one that you originally selected. So make sure you take the time to develop the different feedback channels and processes. Take the time to review the timetables and milestones. Review what's working and what's not. Ask the question, is the solution delivering benefits that everybody accepted? So some problems may require you revisit the problem stages more than once, but each time you have more information of what worked well and what didn't work well, right? So again, it just gets better and better and better. That's why I call it more of a cycle. This whole ideas problem solving that we use, it's more like a cycle because you may have to come back to it time and time again. You make the commitment. Just make the commitment to become a problem solver. Remember, the goal is to solve the problem, not just cover up symptoms, but you want to solve the problem. I studied the life of Albert Einstein when I was in high school. And, one of the things that he was quoted as saying was, the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. So you have to step it up. You've got to look at things at a different level. Thomas Edison said, keep on the outlook for novel and interesting ideas that others have used successfully. Your idea has to only be original in its adaptation to the problem you're currently working on. So you can take ideas that worked for one thing and maybe it was never applied to your problem, but you could take that solution and apply it to your specific problem. For more than 20 years, Professor Edwin Keedy of the University of Pennsylvania Law School, he used to start his very first class of the year by putting two figures on the blackboard, the numbers 4 and 2. And then he would ask the class, he'd say, what's the solution? And there'd always be somebody that would throw out 6, and another one would say 2. Then people would shout 8. But the teacher would just shake his head in the negative. He'd just shake his head back and forth, no. And then Keedy would point out what their error is. He said, all of you failed to ask the key question. What's the problem? He goes on to tell them, unless you know what the problem is, you can't possibly find the answer. So this teacher, understood that in law, but it also works in everyday life. Too much time is spent trying to solve the wrong problem. It's kind of like polishing the brass on a sinking ship. Wrong problem. Most people spend more time and energy going around problems than they do trying to solve them. And that's something that Henry Ford said. So I'm so glad that you downloaded this podcast series on the power of becoming a great problem solver. And I hope you take the time to learn this, go over it several times, implement some of these ideas and things that you can do to be a good problem solver. And, we just appreciate you again. We thank you for tuning in. And let me pray with you today. Father, I thank you for those who have downloaded this podcast today. I pray for them today. I pray today that this podcast not just encourage and enlighten them, but empowers them, Lord, to be a problem solver, Lord. The world needs problem solvers. Lord, we have enough people that are pointing problems out. We need people that can solve the problems. And so, Lord, I thank you for that. I thank you for the people who listen to this podcast on a weekly basis. And Lord, I thank you for them. And I ask you to bless their business, bless their departments, and bless the companies that they work for and with. In the name of Jesus, amen. Thanks again for downloading this week's podcast. And remember, Jesus is Lord, and He wants you blessed.